Alright, we've made really good progress, and everything is good with this amp now except one thing, okay? First of all, let's go over what we've done. I did some experimenting. I basically wanted to... The big problem with this amp right now, it's very linear, and as you can see, and excuse the shaky cam, this one here, the camera, I'm going to have to do handheld for this one. If you look, very, very clean sine wave. Alright, that's 12 kilohertz. I can drop this down to, I don't know, 50 hertz. Alright, hold on. And so you saw 12 kilohertz. There's 50 hertz. Okay. As you can see, if I can get the glare off the screen here for you. Perfectly clean, okay? The only remaining problem, and basically what I ended up having to do was I had to change the grid resistor, or the cathode resistor I should say, I'm sorry. The cathode resistor, which is right here, I had to change that to a 1K, and then I had to fiddle with my feedback resistor until it was a 6.8K. Now how did I arrive at that? Well, I crunched some math formulas for the gain of a 6D8 DJ8, which is not a really high gain tube to begin with, and found that if I raised my cathode resistor a little bit, and then I put a pot in here and adjusted it until I got a clean frequency response all the way across on my negative feedback, those are the two values that worked out the best, okay, with this type of transformer. Now if you use a different output transformer, all of that could be totally different, okay? So really, I'm really happy with this amp. As you can see, it was a real clean, neat build. This loudness circuit works absolutely perfect, and I'll put the values on that when I'm done here. The snubber circuit works perfectly. This amp can actually put out 12.5 watts pure clean power before it starts to break up and give you a little bit of clipping, and it clips equally on the top and bottom, so that's good. I still have a bit of an imbalance between these two resistors and the voltages on them. I don't know why. I don't have an answer why. I think it just has to do with the way the current is drawn through each tube or something, but they balance themselves out. They find their happy place and they both work. As you can see, they're very symmetrical, and I can drive the signal up and down and it doesn't matter. They track really well, so I have no complaints about that. I'm getting about 28 hertz. About 28 hertz is where it starts to really kind of distort the bass, but that's not bad. I mean, it'll go all the way down to 20, but it'll break up a little bit, and that has something to do with feedback. The thing is, the more feedback you put into the circuit, the less gain the amplifier is going to have overall. Alright, so that's part of our issue, is that this amp does not have a real high gain factor. So let me take this thing down a little bit, put it together so I'm not shaking with the camera here all the time, and put this up on the stand, and then we'll continue with what I'm talking about. Alright, that's a little bit better. So what I'm talking about is everything in in electronics is a trade-off, and one of the trade-offs that we made was by using the 6922/6DJ8 tube. Okay, it has a lot of advantages. Number one, it's a very linear tube. It's very low distortion. It's definitely a compromise between gain, and distortion. So to get the lower distortion and the wider bandwidth, the wider swing, and so forth, than you do with the 12AX7 and even 12AU7, the trade-off is gain. Okay, this has a much lower gain. The gain or the mu of a 12AX7 is 100, and the mu or the gain of a 6DJ8 is 33. So there's only so much you can do with this tube, okay? So basically what that means is, let's talk a little bit about levels, okay? Line level, okay, any of you who don't know this, any of you who know all this, it's review. For those of you who don't, what line level is it's a term that describes basically the agreed standard for how many millivolts peak to peak, okay, and it's measured in dBV, or dB based on a 1 volt peak to peak signal, okay, I believe is what it is. And basically, and I might be wrong on that, I'm just kind of going off the top of my head, but basically what has been agreed upon is the standard line level, which would be the level of something like a tuner, a tape deck, an MP3 player. That's called line level, okay? Now phono level is a much lower level than that, okay? But we're talking about line level. And so what that means is the standard line level is going to be approximately -10 dBV, which comes out to be about a third of a volt, about 0.3 volts or so. 0.3, 0.4 volts, something like that, okay? So a little bit less than half of a volt peak to peak, or, you know, I should say RMS. Little less than half a volt RMS in here should give you your fully rated output if the amplifier is designed for line level input, okay? So that means the amplification factor has to be however many volts is coming out of the speaker leads, okay? In this case, for a 12.5 watt amp, okay, you're going to want somewhere around 10 volts, okay? Somewhere approximately 10 volts. So for that 10 volts coming out of there, RMS, you should have about little under half a volt RMS going in, okay? That's your amplification factor of the whole system. Now, one of the problems that you have with this particular design is, as it sits right now, you need closer to 2 volts, okay, or about 4 times the input at this line than the standard line voltage is, okay? So that presents us with a couple of challenges. Number one, the amp really performs well. It's super quiet. You can stick your ear against the speaker on this and you absolutely cannot hear any hiss, any buzz, any hum, anything. The other thing is the amp is super flat linear. When it starts at 20 cycles, it doesn't start changing amplitude or distorting the signal until you're probably from 20 cycles all the way up to about 15 or 16 kilocycles, and then the amplitude goes up just slightly, a little bit, so it amplifies a little better at the higher frequencies than at the lower frequencies, and that's all part of your feedback circuit and so forth. That's going to be affected by this inductor that I put in here. That's one of the reasons, okay? At the higher frequencies, it's blocking some of this, and therefore the impedance here is changing, so it's letting it amplify a little bit more, okay, but not much, okay? It's pretty close within your hearing range, and it's very clean. The sine wave, as you saw in there, that I could go from about 28 cycles, 27 cycles, all the way up until I hit my 20 kilohertz and have an undistorted signal. That's really good for a tube amplifier. Almost too good, because one of the charms of tubes is that it does somewhat color the sound a little bit, and of course a lot of people can argue that. But really, some of the oldest amps that people really like didn't really have, you know, the purest sound. You know, they had a tube sound, quote unquote. But we won't get into that discussion now. There's a, you know, you can talk about that all day long, I think. So, presents us with a challenge. We can either modify this circuit to get more gain here at this one little preamp, okay? Which you're really not going to do here. I mean, you can fiddle around with these a little bit, and I did to the best of my abilities to get it balanced as much as possible. Or you could substitute this particular element for something like a 12AX7. All right, I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. So anyhow, like I was saying, you know, one of the options would be to, you know, fit in a 12AX7, or, you know, in other words, there's 2 channels to this amp, so I have 2 tubes in here, as you can see. I can make one of these tubes a 12AX7, one of these tubes the 6DJ8. I could leave this circuit as is and then use the 12AX7 for each channel, half of it for each channel, and build a higher gain amp. Now, that poses other design considerations and challenges. First of all, you're going to have, with the gain, you're going to introduce more noise. It's not as linear. It's just not quite as good of a tube spec-wise as the 6DJ8. The other option would be to add another tube right here in the, you know, up in the front end. I could probably squeeze another socket right here, and I could put maybe a 12AT7, which is kind of a medium gain type of tube. You don't need a whole lot more gain with what's here, just slightly. So that would create our gain, you know, gradually. And we could bias that tube in such a way that the gain would be just enough to get that, you know, 0.3 volts RMS or so, 0.4, whatever it is, around that half a volt RMS that we need in here, up to what we need here. Pretty much all you'd have to have is about, you know, a factor of about 4. So you got your half a volt here, and you'd have 2 volts out. Because this circuit really works. It's its happiest at 2 volts. You know, and you look at some similar circuits, which, if I can find one here, like from that Morgan Jones book, it even says at the beginning, you know, 2 volts. You know, and that's how what these are revolving around. Now, some of the older tube style preamps, and I've actually built them. I actually have one I can show you. So here is a little preamp that I built a long time ago. Okay, it's just 2 tubes. It has a tone control, bass and treble. It even has multiple inputs and an output. And I actually designed it for these types of amps that have a little, you know, it has a little bit of gain in it. So, sorry about that, but it has just a little bit of gain, and I did that for that purpose. Okay, so that's another thing. So what to do, I'm not sure. The other thing is I could really take the cheap way out and just make a little transistor circuit. Ooh, did I say transistors in a tube amp? Just make a little amplifier, little preamp box, you know, making a little project box that'll go between the MP3 player and the amp here. Really, this amp just needs that 2 volts to be happy. And I really don't want to change it. Like I said, I'll add to it, but I don't think I want to change anything here. It's so linear, it's so quiet, the performance works so well, and you know, this loudness contour, I ended up doing, let's see, I did a 200 picofarad for here. This ended up being a 200 picofarad. Alright, so this one was 200. Okay. 200 puff. And this was a mica. Alright. because that's what I had. This was a .0022, and it was a poly. Okay, little poly cap. And ended up making this, I believe, a 470K. And that gave me just what I wanted. I mean, it kind of, when this volume is down below this tap, okay, and that's how a loudness contour works, is anything below this, okay, this has the most influence on it. Once you get the volume wiper up past this center tap here, it's really not in the center of it, but at this percentage tap, the more you get above it, the less of an influence this has on it, okay? So it really works well. You know, at the higher frequencies, you can, you know, when the volume's way down, you can see that it kind of attenuates it a little bit and kind of boosts the bass a little bit for you. And as you turn the volume up, it gradually fades out and levels. Okay, sorry about that. I keep getting interrupted here. A lot going on at the house today. So anyways, like I was saying, this works really well. I just don't want to mess with it. So what I think I'm going to do is, I'm really not 100% sold on it, but pretty close to it. I'm thinking of the option adding a tube here, you know, a dual triode, possibly a 12A T7. Those are nice quiet tubes. Those were used a lot in tape deck, you know, reel-to-reel tape decks, the old ones, for the preamp section. They're a medium gain, so they're quiet. They don't have a lot of noise. They're quieter than a 12A X7. They have more gain than a 12A U7, and probably from a linearity and bandwidth standpoint, they're probably second in line next to this tube here, these 6DJ8s. They're quite respectable in their performance. So it's a good tube. They're really common still, very easy to find. I have them laying around here, I'm sure, somewhere. So I can do that. Short of that, you know, you can also swap this tube out for like a 12D W7, which has half of a 12A X7 and half of a 12A U7, I think. I really don't want to do that. I don't want to change this concertina phase splitter. I want to leave it, you know, I want to leave this thing the way it is. It works, and it works really well. You know, when you see the top and the bottom of the waveform breaking up equally and perfectly when it goes into clipping, what else could you ask for? I don't want to change that. And I like the low noise of this, so maybe I'll go with either another one of these, or better yet, the 12A T7. That's a real nice compromise. Bias it in such a way that it's, you know, not real high gain, but just enough to get that 2 volts into here. It's not a lot of circuitry, just a few resistors and another tube socket, and, you know, maybe a capacitor. I don't even know if I need that. And boom, we're good to go. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Maybe what I might do before I make any changes to this is maybe I'll leave it up to you guys. Give me some opinions, what you think. I'm always willing to hear what other people think about things, because that's how you learn. And you know, it's a pretty amp. It turned out really nice. I really like the way it looks. I really like the way it works. So what do you think? Should we do something radical like this? Should we do something like adding the 1 extra tube in the front? Should we just leave the sleeping dog lie and maybe do a little transistor preamp that's in a little separate box that you plug your MP3 into to boost that output to 2 volts? What do you think we ought to do? I'd be interested in hearing on the comments. And while you're doing that, then I'm going to think about it myself too before I dig in, because, you know, once you cut that hole in there, you can't uncut it. And but everything else in here, I really like it. I'm getting ready to redo the schematic with all the final changes on it, how I have it. And once I do that, if I can figure out, which I've never done, I've never posted a link to a PDF or anything on YouTube yet, but if I can figure out how to do that, I'll put copies of all this up for you all to download if you want to try to get into the same mess that I did here and, you know, have some fun. So anyhow, and I'll try to do a little bit of a parts list, not every part, but at least like the transformers and things like that. So, you know, if you want to try to reproduce this or come up with your own version of this, that'd be great. Alright, so this is a nice short video, and I'm going to get this posted up there, and hopefully enough of you will give me some comments and help me to make a choice. Alright, you guys have a great day. Thanks.